You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hello, my name is Uwe Schulte, and it's a pleasure to welcome you back to our second series of our podcast, Let's Talk Sustainable Business. This series is brought to you by the Conference Board Global Sustainability Center. And today I will be talking to Rasha Hasaneen, VP Innovation, PM Excellence, and Executive Director of the Center for Healthy and Efficient Spaces, and Scott Tew, Vice President, Sustainability and Managing Director, Center for Energy Efficiency and Sustainability. Both of our guests work at Trane Technologies. Listeners of our last series will notice that for the first time, we have two guests in one episode. I'm sure this will make an even livelier exchange. So first, let me introduce our guests to you. Rasha holds a Master of Science in Engineering from Stanford University and received her PhD from Texas A&M University. And this was quite an impressive achievement, as she was holding executive positions first at SAP and then at GE during working on her thesis. Scott holds a Master of Ecology and Environmental Science from Livingston University and continued his academic education at Harvard and Cornell. He started his career in communications and public affairs at Ciba Specialty Chemicals, and now has a distinguished career at Trane Ingersoll Rand over the last 14 years. Welcome, Rasha and Scott. Can you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and your personal sustainability story?
Thank you, Uwe. Thank you so much for having us here. And that was a very gracious introduction. I would have to say, when it comes to sustainability, I really started very early on in my career thinking about sustainability, but I didn't really start to understand the impact until I was working at SAP a little bit later, after I'd gotten my master's at Stanford. And I was working in Silicon Valley. It became clear to me that that sort of the digital transformation. Now, remember, this was back when people didn't think digital was going to be a thing. That the digital transformation was really going to have an impact on industrials a lot more than it was going to have an impact on consumers. And that our ability to really bend the curve on sustainability was around looking at industrial companies and how digital technologies could help impact them. And that was when I really started thinking about sustainability as a topic. And of course, just like every great person who wants to make a shift in their career, you kind of go back to school. And because I'm very goal oriented, I wasn't going to go back to school without getting a degree. So I actually started my PhD in order to learn more about the intersection of sustainability and industrial companies. And that's what really started me on that journey. I learned a lot. I worked a lot more on the energy and power generation side of sustainability and the impact we can have on oil and gas processes, on the grid, on power generation. And then when I spoke to Trane at the time Ingersoll Rand about this role, that the hook that they used was, hey, how about coming over to the demand side, because you can make a much bigger impact on sustainability when you start to impact the demand for power. And so it was super exciting to me to come work for a company that had sustainability as a goal and as a purpose, but that had the opportunity to have such a fantastic impact on climate and on sustainable civilization.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, that's, as I said, quite impressive step you've taken there. Scott, how about your journey?
Yeah, Uwe, once again, thank you for the time today. It's great to be with your listeners and also to be joined by my friend Rasha. We work closely together. My journey in sustainability is a bit different. 7 generations before me were farmers. And I think that if you're from a farming culture, if you have it in your background, if you know anything about farming, what you do know is that farmers are very focused on conservation. They're very focused on resource use, and they're very focused on low impact, especially to the environment. And so with so many generations behind me focused on farming, sort of was heavy on me on where do I go in my career. And I landed with a company and worked from day one. on environmental policy, and then later on things like I do today, which is how do I help a company reduce its resource intensity, resource use? How do I help a company be better tomorrow in terms of product development and design, and how we work with customers than we were the year before? And so it sort of has all come together for me, and I feel fortunate to be able to do something that I love. That's also part of my legacy for my family. So that's the short and high level view of how I got to where I'm at now.
Yeah, and I can see the farming aspect very clearly. Even so, as you know, we have a lot of discussion around sustainability of farming these days as well. But let's not drive into that one. That's for another podcast. To be honest with you, Ingersoll Rand, Trane, um, it's a bit confusing. The names keep changing. Can you tell us a little bit about the development of Trane and the business field you're in?
Absolutely, Uwe. So when I joined the company, which was really only 3 years ago, I joined a company called Ingersoll Rand, and Ingersoll Rand was really a diversified industrial. So we served two primary sectors: an industrial sector and a climate sector. And within the climate sector, we had very recognizable, what I would say, strategic brands. Trane for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, Thermo King for transport, refrigeration, etc. On the industrial side, really the Ingersoll Rand brand was how we went to market. And in 2019, the leadership of the company made the decision to split the company or separate the company into its climate business and its industrial business. And in a reverse Morris trust, the industrial businesses then merged with Gardner Denver to form what is now the new Ingersoll Rand or Ingersoll Rand. And they kept, obviously, the brand of Ingersoll Rand because that's how they went to market. Whereas the climate sector, we went to market really under the Trane brand, under the Trane residential brand, under the Thermo King brand, and a number of sub-brands underneath there. And so it became, our challenge was really to name this new company. And there was a lot of research done, and really the name that stood out in terms of our ability to really bring forward a new purpose-filled climate-facing company was really Trane Technologies, which leveraged the brand strength of the Trane brand, but it also emphasized the technology piece, the innovation piece, this concept of really bringing to bear the best in class as it relates to climate control technologies. So heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration. It's a little bit confusing, but hopefully over time that brand equity will build itself.
You actually made it a little bit clearer to me right now, so I hope the same applies to our listeners. Scott, when I look at your website, I can read sustainability is not a buzzword at Trane Technologies. It's core of our strategy. Our commitment extends to the environmental impact of our operations, products and services, and people. Tell me, how was the development for Trane to make such a bold statement, I would say?
Yeah, it's a fair question, Uwe, and I'm happy to share just a sort of a look back over the past decade. We began our journey like many companies, leveraging sustainability as a way for us to drive down some resource use in the operations footprint. So how do we go about using less energy, yet still make and manufacture products like we do globally? It began there like many companies begin their sustainability journey with a focus on becoming more efficient, but it quickly evolved into something much more strategic. We conducted our first climate-based scenario assessment back in 2013, and it became very clear to the leadership, the management of the company, that the looming climate impacts in front of the company, there was a belief that we had to do our own part. Our greenhouse gas footprint and greenhouse gas emissions is the number one non-financial material issue for the company. We've done several materiality assessments. And if you believe the tools, and if you're a company that uses tools like we do to help you identify areas where you should focus, greenhouse gas footprint reductions was number one by far for us. And so that meant that because of the culture that we're in, we have thousands and thousands of mechanical engineers that help us design solutions for customers every day. And if you know anything about mechanical engineers, you know that we plan things out to make them happen. We measure our progress along the way. And so it was much the same for sustainability. We began a journey of reducing our greenhouse gas footprint. And what that meant was it had to extend even beyond our operations. It had to move into, what does it mean for our product? What does it mean for customer solutions? What does it even mean for our customer carbon footprint? One of the things that your listeners should understand is that HVAC systems, these heating and ventilation systems in your home or in the office where we work, these represent roughly 40% of the electricity consumption. And those are the same systems that we design and install for customers globally. We saw that as a personal, we took that as a very personal issue, meaning that we saw that there was an opportunity for us to do better going forward, making systems that use less energy, that have a considerable smaller carbon footprint going forward, and much more climate friendly. And so, from that moment forward, we began to think more strategically, much more long term about how do we adjust everything about the company, every process, whether we're talking functions like finance or human resources, or we're talking the businesses and how we design products. How do we adjust all of those processes to become something different in the future than we were a decade ago? And so I think that's exactly how it began to be tied to our strategy as a company. They've become one and the same. They've become so interwoven that sustainability is not seen as some initiative. It's actually seen as the way that we conduct our own selves in terms of our operations. It's also seen how we view our customers and how we solve their biggest issues.
Scott, I'll have to ask a little bit more about that before we go on. When I listen to you, it sounds really like obvious to do it that way. You analyze your materiality and you find that your carbon footprint is the most important thing to do, and then you engage. And first you engage with yourself, and then you engage with your customers. But I have to say that many companies are really struggling with that. So the question for me is, who was the driving force to make that change from cost optimization to having a visibility of impact?
Well, I'd like to point to one person, Uwe, but if there is no one person, I think it's a collective. I will say that it did evolve. That was your word, I think. How did things evolve over time? And I think our leadership team, the management team, and even our employees, employees typically stand back and make sure, or they kind of wait to see if the words coming out of management's mouths match the actions. And say that we saw that like many companies do in the early days, the 2013, 14, where employees were wondering if the company really meant what it was saying publicly. And I think all of our employees began to see that we, in fact, began to change things. We changed how we were investing in our operational footprint. We changed how we began to interact with suppliers and vet suppliers. And we also changed product design, and we began to think through how do we adjust all the things necessary to make sure that we're addressing the big items, the most material, the priority items. And so, they began to see the proof. And once the employees got engaged, I think it was unstoppable. We saw innovation, which Rasha can point to. We saw innovation levels increase. We saw employees engage and be creative at a local level, at a national level, company-wide. And I think most exciting for us is we began to see our industry peers in the industry. We began to see them also change their behaviors and change how they, in fact, innovate and work in the marketplace. And so there's probably nothing more rewarding than seeing your industry peers begin to change their behaviors sort of in lockstep with you, and even policymakers calling you to find out what's possible well the regulatory or compliance schedule. And so we saw all those things happen. I think when you're in a company and you begin to see all those things happen, things begin to change. It takes on its own energy, and it begins to seed itself in areas where it's certainly not an initiative anymore, because the value becomes very apparent to everyone.
I understand. You've given me a lead into asking my question to Rasha about innovation. And again, Rasha, I looked at your website, and it says there, when you stand at the forefront of innovation, the future is filled with possibility. That sounds really enticing to me. But what are the elements that Trane is emphasizing in such a transition?
Yeah, Uwe. I mean, when we look at our next phase around sustainability, and Scott and his team really just do a fantastic job at continuing to push the organization to think big and to think bold. When we look at our next phase and you look at our 2030 sustainability commitments, it becomes pretty clear that, that with everything we have in our bag of tricks today, we actually don't know how we're going to get there. And there's this big old bubble of like of achievements and impact that say innovation, place innovation here. And so the idea is, unless we start to really think boldly about how we transform this industry, we're not going to make our goals. And so, like as Scott mentioned, during the last the first phase of this, when we initially set out with our initial sustainability goals, it drove a lot of internal innovation within the organization to really get us there. These are bigger and bolder goals. And so we absolutely believe that we need to drive additional innovation in a similar fashion to the way we did in our first phase. But really also we're thinking through how do we step up our game and do things that are truly transformative to this industry, that allow us to really bend the curve on sustainability as it relates to HVAC and refrigeration, which, as you know, have such a huge impact on climate today. And so we're looking at that, and we truly want to lead the industry here. And so Scott and I joke whenever our competitors do something, it's like, yeah, we want everybody to do it. We want everyone to be more sustainable, right? We just want to do it first. And so the idea here is to really think outside the box and challenge ourselves differently to ensure that we're able to meet those goals.
Thank you, Rasha. That in a conceptual way, I think I'll get that. But Scott, let's take an example. Thermo King, for example. Yeah. So a cooled transportation. Can you give me an example how you successfully innovated in a sustainable way?
Well, I think that the Thermo King solutions are sort of an unknown secret story to a more sustainable world, because transport refrigeration is one of the greatest solutions for reducing food loss and food waste globally. And we transport a large percentage, the majority percentage of fresh food around the world and perishables, including vaccines in this COVID era. And that's really important. The cold chain is the number one way to reduce food loss. And so the Thermo King solution set is already a great sustainability story. But you ask about a recent innovation, and I would say one there is just that Thermo King is, they're on every corner in every city. So we're delivering those fresh foods in your neighborhood, whatever country you're in, 170 plus countries we're in with Thermo King, which means that there's something being delivered near you. And in many countries and cities, the UK, for instance, there's new laws around electrifying all the vehicles and delivery vehicles in cities and within city limits. And, Thermo King has to stay one step ahead of the curve for these ever-changing regulations around reducing noise pollution in cities, reducing particulates in cities from transportation, and also, we have to be there because our customers that those units are on, our customers depend on us to be there ahead of the curve for compliance reasons, but also to not have any trade-offs. And one of the things that our innovation team is very careful about is how do we continue to innovate in ways that do not have trade-offs, like reduced efficiency or reduced or an increased cost, for instance, or reduced capacity. And so the innovation team has to work with outside partners and with other groups to make sure that when the UK decides that it's all electric and that it also has to meet a certain decibel range for noise pollution, how do we innovate our units to make sure that we have no trade-offs on the food loss side, no trade-offs on efficiency, no trade-offs on greenhouse gas impacts, no trade-offs on capacity. And we're able to do that. We were doing it ahead of the curve, and we continue to innovate there, not just on a country by country basis, but also there's sort of a global look. And our approach to that solution is the same across any country. It's those same principles of how do we continue to deliver these solutions without having negative trade-offs. Does that help?
Yeah, but let me dive a little bit deeper, because the way you've expressed that right now, it sounded almost like that would be a regulation-driven innovation. But I think what I sense you're saying is um, you will help people comply with a regulation, but you think ahead and think about the total impact and look at the totality of impact without trade-offs.
Yeah, that's the bigger piece, and Uwe, and the piece that I think is most exciting is that we're doing that well ahead of any compliance. Sometimes the compliance piece of the regulation, it happens in concert or in cooperation with policymakers and regulating bodies well in advance. So we've been working with the UK, with the state of California, with the European Union on these very issues. And the Thermo King team has been at the table helping those policymakers and regulators understand sort of the limits of what's possible today with technology, but also to understand how we are innovating and what the time frame may be on new solutions. And so the regulations can happen in lockstep, and I think in very smart ways, so that we can improve impact in 2021, but we also are getting ready for even less impact in 2025. And so I think all of those things working together, sort of a systems approach to trade-offs or lack of trade-offs, that's the piece that we're doing that's much more collaborative than ever before.
And Uwe, I would also
Yeah.
say, just to add on to what Scott is saying and emphasize the point, it's when you're optimizing for one thing, it's a lot easier to do. So if it's a lot easier to get a quieter unit that's less efficient. But when we go in and talk about meeting regulations, we're not meeting a higher reg on one end and then going down to minimum standards on another end if it means we're compromising our sustainability commitments. We're going to go out
That's right.
and find ways to meet that regulation that may be really hard and still be not just minimum efficiency, but the most efficient unit on the market. So we're not because we know that efficiency has a direct impact on our greenhouse gas footprint. And so that's, I think, what Scott is saying is, even though parts of this might be regulation driven, a lot of it is purpose driven, because there are easy ways to meet regs, and then there's the right way to meet regs.
I understand.
Rasha answered much better. That's exactly right.
Of course. The question that remains in the back of my mind, and let me be a bit challenging here, is, we've seen businesses in Europe, and I don't want to mention the car industry here, but that have actually told regulators that and that carbon level can't be achieved, and you should not regulate it that way. Yeah. And when you said we're talking with regulators, I understand from what you said before that you will actually push the limits rather than trying to preserve limits. Am I overinterpreting what you're saying?
No, I think you're right. We have in fact done that in regions and countries and states very consistently for the last 6 years. We've worked on the ground proactively to push the limits for transitioning to next generation technologies that are much more climate friendly, much more efficient, and they do not come, as Rasha explained, with any negative trade-offs. That, of course, it's easier said than done. But I mean, that should be the commitment for not only our industry, but for any company, especially companies manufacturing very long-lasting equipment and machines like we do. I just think it's imperative. If you're making equipment that's going to last, say, 10 years or more, then I think the plans of today need to reflect where we would like everything to be 10 years from now. And so that's what we've been trying to do as a company, and that's what we're doing with public policy leaders as well.
So I understand your greenhouse gas commitment, and it makes a lot of sense because I get it that you can keep stuff, food stuff, fresh for much longer. So this is great. But on the other hand, you have that footprint issue, of course. But there is the other element of that, which I would describe as circularity. So what happens with the equipment when it comes to the end of life? Rasha, are you innovating in that field as well?
We are. I think when it comes to circularity, though, the teams are actually doing a pretty great job in thinking through that. Now, we have in our the second part of my job besides innovation is really looking at product excellence, and within our product development process, we do have standard work around design for sustainability. And so every project has to go through a design for sustainability check. That sometimes means circularity, sometimes it means other things. But I think, Scott, you've done some work in this area in looking at how much recycled material goes in terms of reducing our sort of our mined material footprint, but also how much of our product actually isn't just recyclable, but actually gets recycled at end of life.
Yeah, we've looked at both. If I could just insert a couple of things, Uwe, sort of in terms of detail. Our focus right now has been on where are the big areas of impact, and we're looking at it across the entire value stream. So in other words, from the supply side, where are the big areas of impact there as it relates to circular? Meaning, should we continue to ask our suppliers to mine virgin copper for our systems and actually use millions of pounds of virgin copper each year? And we have a team now focused on how do we reevaluate that? Can we move fully to recycle copper, for an example? And just that one move would be huge on terms of positive impact. So we've really been focused on more than just life cycle impacts and assessments, more around big impacts. And Rasha's point about what do we know? We also know that a large percentage of our current product lines are recycled. Greater than 90% of our products are recycled fully because most of them are made of metals that can be recycled and have value. But we're after the other piece too, which is what about that's not being recycled, and why is it not being recycled? Can it be recycled? Is there another issue on the recycler end that we can help impact? And we're working with several outside organizations to understand more about the whole circular issue, because I mean, in the future, we'd like to be like some other companies in terms of fully circular design, meaning our products, once we have them in the marketplace, there's no end of life considerations. The end of life considerations are already built in, sort of baked in to how the products were designed and how they're used by customers. That's our end goal. And we're just beginning that journey.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And I must say that what I learned from our conversation is that you guys are actually doing two things at the same time. You drive sustainable innovation and you become more competitive at the same time. I like your emphasizing to say we want all the competitors to be very sustainable as well, but we want to be there first. And obviously you want to offer your customers solutions that are more attractive whilst being more sustainable at the same time. So I can see how this business model of sustainable innovation is actually helping you to get more business with your customers. So that's very interesting. And unfortunately, we come to an end of this episode, and we will continue in our next episode to talk about how this is actually done, how you manage that sustainable innovation, because I think a lot of listeners will be very interested in that. Rasha and Scott, a final remark to our listeners for today?
Well, I think you captured it, Uwe, when you mentioned that our intention is to work collaboratively, much bigger than the company itself, and in terms of influencing all the other levers that have to be influenced industry-wide and even globally to make sure that whatever we're doing has a bigger ripple and influence effect globally than typically what one company can accomplish.
I agree, Scott and Uwe. I would just love to close by saying thank you for having us here today. Obviously, as Scott mentioned, we really are. We really know we can't do this alone, and we really, our goal is to be the best partner for other companies in this field, to really drive sustainability together. So thank you for having us and for allowing us to tell our story to your listeners. And if it helps anyone on their sustainability journey, then I think we've met our goal.
Thanks, Uwe.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, both of you. And I think we have captured some really good thinking around that very important part of heating and climate control. So thank you for this. And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to our podcast series or explore the entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. You can also write to us at sustainability@tcb.org. And thank you for listening. And please join us again in 2 weeks' time. For now, goodbye.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.